So find your name on the board. I missed
found
somebody's
it.
name and I'm not sure who.
Me, because I don't see my name at all.
Oh,
Yeah,
your name.
I found it.
Here, why don't you put your name up, honey?
Excuse me, Anne.
Yes, Tab.
Are we having this
Maya, put your name up, please.
thing?
Are we having what?
Like
No, I just explained that, dear. Excuse me, Jessica. I thought you said you were building. Okay. So does everybody know where they are this morning? Okay, let's do the board. Who can read the morning message this morning? I had the ability to develop things with children by being present with them in the moment and responding to their questions, their interests, and their curiosity, and helping them, getting them things to follow through with that, to help them continue to explore or understand something better. I had the ability to do it on the spot. And some of that I discovered because I had to do that, because I was a single mother with a young child. Life was very busy, getting the child to and from daycare, working full time, and it was just crazy. And I had to learn to be present when I was there in the kindergarten classroom. And that was easier for me than thinking I could control it by planning every minute of it ahead. I think I also was surprised how funny they were. And so I continued to be able to be surprised by them. The next big turning point was talking together with parents out on the playground, watching the children, watching the problems that occurred in a repetitive way. So they would come back to us day after day with the same problems. And they were obviously not learning how to figure them out. So it was, so-and-so took my ball, so-and-so took my ball, so-and-so took the swing from me, and then he hit me, blah, blah, blah. So we began to kind of look around for another way to handle it, because we didn't like the way we were handling it, which was that we were always in charge of deciding what would happen in the problem and giving out consequences, and we were just looking for something else. And some parents had seen, there was a group called Parents for Peace. Is that what it was called? I think. Parents for Peace. And they had seen a video of children solving problems in a schoolyard in inner city San Francisco using conflict managers model. So certain children were trained to solve the problems, went out with clipboards and armbands and solved the problems and recorded everything. And so we saw that, and we were kind of interested in that. And we showed it to the children in the grade 3, and they wanted to try it. So that's how we got started even dabbling in this. The younger children were starting to play peacemaking in the blocks and drama corner of the room. And Esther and I had noticed that they were playing at peacemaking, and then we began to really think they could learn. Why couldn't they learn? If they could play it, they could learn how to do it. So, and that was it was kind of revolutionary, I think, to look at young children that way, and to think that they might be able to take on some of their own problems. They discarded all those props very quickly. They liked the shape of the session, that it had rules, and that you ask people how they feel, and then you listen, and then they liked that part. So they kept that shape a little bit, but that began to change. And we began to notice that the questions they asked in the beginning were different every time. So it would be, the rules would be now no fiddling. And then you would know, oh, that's that kid who always fiddles and you can't get him to talk because he's fiddling. So the rules began to be customized to the different situations and children. But the spirit of it was always talking it out until you felt better. And the concept of reconciliation was very strong from the beginning. But we began to notice after a while that what resolved meant to them was sometimes different than what it meant to us. And then we had to respect what they needed from it, that they get what they needed from it, not that we get what we needed from it. So they would sometimes get back to playing, and we wouldn't think it was solved yet, but they obviously felt better enough to play. So there we were, collaborating with the children again. So it just was, I was constantly putting myself in a position where I had to be flexible and sharing my power from the beginning of that, I think. But I found children who chose to be peacemakers developed a pretty wide understanding about what others needed in a conflict situation, so that if a child was really upset, they would say, "Do you need more time before we talk?" And they would never let kids off the hook, really. They would come back to them, or they would come get us if they weren't able to do it verbally with them. And there were kids that peacemaking didn't work for. I felt I couldn't help but look at myself and think, was I really saying how I felt without blaming the other person? Was I listening? Was I willing to solve it? So I had to ask myself the same questions the kids asked each other. And so it was a big growing time for most of us, adults, I think, because we couldn't help but change, be influenced by what we were going through together. Yes, I think respect is essential, and it means a teacher has to change the way she is in the classroom, because she has to listen to a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old say how they feel, and she has to listen until they're done. And I began to realize about myself that I was always finishing sentences for children and making conclusions for them, and that I wasn't a good listener. So I had to learn to do that. And so while I was learning it, sometimes I would talk about it to the children. There was always that struggle about coming out of yourself and seeing other people for what they were and respecting that. And that's a normal kindergarten growth. But certainly, yes, we did have to learn to close our mouths and listen to the other side. And that's very humbling sometimes, because we began to understand that there was more than one version about what happened. That was another big learning we did. There wasn't one truth, which is how we always used to say, yeah, but what happened? What happened? Yeah, but he says, you took the. So when people talk to each other instead of through the teacher interpreting everything, and they're talking really about what they experienced, then if they're trying to listen to the other person's story, they're beginning to realize that they were both there, they both experienced it, and they experienced it differently. And there had to be room for that somehow. And that was hard, and that was really big thing for us all to learn, to just accept that there was more than one version. And that's when we got off on reading versions of stories of fairy tales, because that was a natural way to go with it, to realize that these stories that were handed down orally, they took little turns here and there and came out a little differently. But they were essentially the same story. So wasn't that the same as us having different versions of the same story? So then we learned that word, version. That's your version. And that meant, okay, you can have your version, I can have mine. We can agree to disagree. And I would say most of the parents were trying to do it and do it at home, and we were trying to be consistent and talk the same language, share the language. When they were in activity time and engaged in their own activities in the room, I would really watch. So I would see the interactions, and I would see little clues all the time about children embracing other people, other children, or bringing other children to the problem and supporting them while they talked it through. And I would see that sort of interaction all the time in the room. So I knew. Also, I would reinforce it a lot in group time. Sometimes I would model problem solving in group time. if there was a problem that didn't get solved, I would ask the people in group time, can we talk about this all together? And then I would say, now, Sandy had this problem outside, and then Moira did this. And then Sandy came to me, and then I would say, now, what would you do? Has that ever happened to you? So we would sort of brainstorm and find the ways we were the same as the person that it happened to. And then I say, well, did you ever feel like this, like you were really mad that someone did? Well, yeah. So then we would find that we were similar. And I think finding yourself in it was always the clue. That was the way that people began to change, when they found themselves in the problem-solving process. So I would carefully engineer those ones that we showcased so that they would get solved. So we would see it go through to its final conclusion, and children would see how that could work out. And 3-year-olds who were just coming to school at the end of, turning 4 by December, were starting to do it. I think it's all the same. It's all face to face. You have to face the person you have the problem with. Instead of telling on them, and I would go with you to face that person, and then I would give you a chance to tell them how you feel. And that's the powerful part right there. And that's the part even little children can understand. They get to say how they feel. First you have to control yourself so that you aren't just hitting people. Then you have to learn to speak and say, I didn't like it when you... And then you have to learn to listen to the other person. And with 4-year-olds, sometimes that was as far as it went, and that was enough. Just getting to stand there and say how you felt to the person was very powerful. And then we worked on refining that. But that was a big thing to learn, to put words to how you felt when you were upset. And a 3-year-old understands what feeling better is. They know when it feels better with the person they were fighting with. And that's what you're trying to get at. If you talk face to face, you'll feel better, and then you can play. So it's sort of a simpler equation at that age, but it's the same process. And maybe some of the words are put in by me at that point to model. There's a lot more modeling with younger children, and a lot more involvement to make sure that it is successful. It was very rewarding to watch them start to take that on and step up to do it themselves. And children would become peacemakers in a very organic way when they felt comfortable doing it. So you always kind of watch for that moment when a child would take it on themselves and take hold of the process on their own. I think all of us ended up taking it home. We couldn't help it. We were changing. We were being changed. So we had to try it out. You can't go back. You can't go back and just not take responsibility anymore once you realize what your role can be in the conflict towards solving it. I was a teacher at DES for 12 years. And then going into a school where there were 50 different languages spoken meant that I couldn't do peacemaking the way I had. But I spent a lot of time on the playground, and I saw the same problems, and I realized kids are kids, and when they play, they have the same old conflicts over the ball and over this and that, and turns and respect, and that it was all the same. So I just had to develop it a little differently so that we had shared language that was sort of minimal. But the face-to-face was the powerful part. So sometimes I would stay behind children when they faced each other, and then I would prompt them with the words, I don't like it when you, because they were just learning English, I don't like it when you, and then they always knew the word, the thing they didn't like. When you hit me, when you take the ball, they knew those words, right? So I gave them the sentence to put it in, and then the other person said something back. So it was very abbreviated form of peacemaking, but it it became very workable. In the beginning, when I would call kids over, when I would see them having a problem in the yard, and I'd call them over, they wouldn't come because they thought they were in trouble, because the history there would be consequences for when you do things wrong. There wasn't any kind of process. So I did help build that process, and I got a very different view from people who've been working there and working with older kids and had a different way of doing process. Sometimes they wouldn't have the children speak to each other. They would speak on their own and really tell their side of the story, and then you'd speak alone to the other person. So there was a whole other step put in there, sometimes because the emotions ran so high with the older kids. That we had, and teachers called that an investigation. I'll do an investigation. So they would listen to this side and listen to this side, and then they would get people together. So there was a lot of different language, but we started to develop our own shared way of looking at the problems. I think people by that time were a little nervous about the time it took out of the classroom. But I was always able to go and follow through because I wasn't in the classroom. So if a problem happened outside, I would go back up to the classroom, make sure that the child felt all right. If they didn't, I'd take them to the other person so they could talk to them and make sure the reconciliation part was happening, because I knew that was the part that changes people. That's the part that makes people want to do this, because it shows them that they can feel better by doing that. Well, I think younger children are always watching older children to see how they handle things. So when we're in a situation where older children, grade 3s or grade 2s, were handling conflict by peacemaking, younger children were watching that and seeing that it worked for them and absorbing the ritual themselves and absorbing the tone and the emotion, the emotional component themselves, and then they naturally start playing that out, because that's what they do at that age. At 3 and 4, they'll go and play in dramatic play what they see in the rest of their life. So that's a lot of how they learned, was by watching the other children before they tried to make it work for themselves. When you're starting anything new, it's helpful to have a framework, which you can use for practicing. So, so you go by the framework, you ask the questions you're supposed to ask, and eventually you start to get caught up in the emotion and the process of the peacemaking itself. And you discard the, because you see what the spirit is, you feel what the spirit is. You discard the framework to hold on to the essence, the spirit of it.
Well, Jessica, since you're so nasty, I'm not your friend anymore!
Maya, don't say that, because someday you will want to be her friend again.
Your butt! I'll get in! Jessica!
Get over here! What happened? Because I'm clueless.
I just told you, she's trying to make a problem.
About what? That's what I want to know, the content of the problem.
She's just saying stuff like things that would be in a problem, and she's trying to make a problem, that's all!
Okay, can you stop screaming? It really makes it hard to listen to
I
you.
can't stop!
Well, then go away from me and blow your nose, and I'll talk to Maya. What's happening?
Well, I don't know.
Well, what happened that Jessica's talking about? You were there.
We were in a fight yesterday, remember?
Yeah.
And it's sort of continuing today, too.
Do you have any idea why it's continuing? Would you really think about it? Think about if someone was doing it to you.
I would be
What would you want them to say to you?
I would say,
Just
like,
walk around the playground and think about that.
I would say, I want to play with my friends too. But what if you can play with your friends and I can play with your
Well,
friends?
think of a kind way to say it and see if it works. Try it out. Come back if it's a problem still. Yeah. It's windy.
Help me! Help me!
They're frisky today. Whose football do I have?